I thought I ran the most chaotic ER in the city, the undisputed queen of triage. Until a quiet woman in a gray hoodie walked past the line and brought my reign crashing down.
The fluorescent lights of the ER hummed a tune of organized chaos, a sound I'd grown so accustomed to it was practically my life soundtrack. Tuesday nights were the worst, a chaotic symphony of beeping monitors, rattling gurneys, and the strained, desperate voices of people having the worst day of their lives. I, however, was the conductor, charge nurse Sarah Jenkins. For 12 years, this controlled pandemonium was my domain. I could triage 3 patients with my eyes closed, spot a drug seeker from 50 paces, and calm a hysterical family member with a carefully measured dose of firm compassion. I was good at my job because I saw patterns, not people. It was a survival mechanism. You start seeing every patient as someone's mom or son, and you burn out in 6 months. I saw charts, symptoms, and insurance cards. Tonight, the orchestra was playing a particularly frantic tune. A multi-car pileup on the interstate had flooded our bays with a stream of broken bones and terrified faces. I was at the main desk, a small island in a sea of misery, trying to coordinate bed assignments while simultaneously fielding a call from an upstairs ward. My focus was a laser beam, cutting through the noise. That's when I first noticed her. She was standing just beyond the yellow line on the floor that separated the waiting area from the clinical space, a line most people respected out of fear or common sense. But she was just over it, a silent, still figure in the swirling storm. She was a black woman, maybe in her late 40s, dressed in a plain, slightly frayed gray hoodie, dark jeans, and worn-out sneakers. She clutched a cheap-looking tote bag to her chest like a shield. What struck me was her stillness. She wasn't wailing, she wasn't bleeding, she wasn't even fidgeting. She was just watching. Her eyes, calm and intelligent, scanned the room, taking in every detail. In my world, calmness in the ER waiting area usually meant one of 2 things. They were waiting for someone, or they weren't really sick. My internal triage meter mentally tagged her as a non-priority. I finished my call, slamming the phone down with a satisfying click. "Mike, I need vitals in Bay 3, and someone page orthopedics again. This guy's femur is not going to set itself." I barked to one of the junior nurses who scurried off obediently. I felt a flicker of satisfaction. This was control. This was order. "Excuse me, nurse?" The voice was quiet, but clear. It came from the woman in the hoodie. I didn't even turn my head fully, just angled it slightly. "You need to check in at the front desk and take a seat, ma'am. We'll get to you when we can." My tone was clipped, efficient, the "we're swamped so don't bother me" voice I had perfected over the years. I turned back to my computer screen, the glow of the monitor illuminating my focused frown. The system was lagging, and I had 3 more admissions to process. A few moments passed. I could feel her presence, a persistent, silent pressure at the edge of my awareness. "Nurse," she said again, a little closer this time. I could smell the faint scent of rain on her clothes. I sighed, a long, theatrical exhalation meant to convey just how monumentally busy I was. This time, I turned to face her. "Ma'am," I started, putting steel in my voice. "As you can see, this is an emergency room. We are dealing with multiple critical patients from a major accident. Whatever your issue is, you need to wait your turn. The front desk will give you the paperwork." I gestured vaguely toward the glass partition of the main reception area, where 2 clerks were frantically typing. She didn't move. Her gaze was steady. "I understand you're busy, but I need to speak with the attending physician in charge of the trauma patients." I almost laughed. The audacity. Everyone in here needed to speak with a doctor. That's why they were here. I said, my voice dripping with condescension, "That's not how this works. You get triaged, you wait, you get seen. That's the system. Now please step back behind the line." I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, frustration, maybe annoyance, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. She just stood her ground. "It's imperative I speak with them now." This was the kind of thing that drove me crazy. People who thought their scraped knee or their week-old cough was the most important thing in the world, more important than the guy bleeding out in Bay 2. Listen, I snapped, finally losing my patience and stepping closer to her, lowering my voice to an intimidating hiss. I don't know who you think you are, but you are interfering with patient care. You are a distraction my team does not need right now. Go back to the waiting room or I'll have security escort you out. I turned my back on her, a clear dismissal. It was a power move I'd used 100 times. It almost always worked. I leaned over to Mike, who was passing by with a blood pressure cuff. "Can you believe some people?" I muttered under my breath. No visible trauma, just waltzes in here demanding to see the attending like she's ordered a pizza. Mike just shook his head, too busy to engage. And that should have been the end of it. But just as I was about to dive back into my work, all hell broke loose. "Code Blue, Trauma 1, Code Blue." The call echoed through the ER, instantly electrifying the air. My head snapped up. Trauma 1 was the big one, the motorcycle versus SUV. The patient had been unstable from the moment he rolled in. Dr. Evans, a young and perpetually frazzled attending, was already in the room, sweat beading on his forehead. I ran over, my brief annoyance with the woman in the hoodie instantly forgotten, my mind switching into pure life-saving algorithm. "He's crashing. BP is 60 over palp. He's throwing VTAC," Evans yelled, his voice cracking under the pressure. "Get me the paddles. Pushing another amp of epi," yelled, his voice cracking under the pressure. The room was a blur of blue scrubs and frantic energy. I was outside, pushing meds through the IV line, calling out readings, my mind a steel trap of procedures and dosages. We were losing him. I could see it in the wild panic in Dr. Evans' eyes. He was a good doctor, but he was in over his head. "Where the hell is Alistair?" Evans screamed, his voice raw with desperation as he charged the paddles again. "Someone get me Dr. Alistair on the phone now!" Dr. Alistair, the head of trauma surgery, a living legend in the hospital, but notoriously difficult to get a hold of. She was probably in a 9-hour surgery, unreachable. We were on our own. "Clear!" Evans shouted. The patient's body jumped on the gurney. The monitor shrieked a flat, continuous tone. Nothing. The chaos reached a fever pitch. A nurse was crying in the corner. Evans looked like he was about to collapse. And in that moment of pure, unadulterated crisis, a calm, commanding voice cut through the noise like a scalpel. "Stop! Everyone!" The voice came from behind me. I turned, my heart still hammering against my ribs. It was the woman in the gray hoodie. She had stepped past the nurse's station, past the invisible line she wasn't supposed to cross, and was standing at the threshold of the trauma bay as if she owned it. She pushed the hood off her head, revealing a neat cornrow hairstyle. Her eyes, no longer calm, but blazing with an intensity that sucked the air out of the room, were fixed on Dr. Evans. She dropped her cheap tote bag on the floor with a soft thud. Underneath her hoodie, I could now see the collar of a set of dark blue surgical scrubs. She took one more step forward, her gaze sweeping over the chaotic room, over the dying patient, over the panicking young doctor. Then her eyes landed on me. They were cold, sharp, and utterly terrifying. The entire ER seemed to fall silent, waiting. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. It was a voice that didn't request obedience, it commanded it. And it was directed at me. "You," she said, her stare pinning me to the spot. "Nurse, what's your name?" My mouth went dry. The entire ER, a moment ago a cacophony of panic shouts and beeping alarms, had shrunk to the space between me and this woman. Her eyes were like black ice, and I felt myself skidding, losing all control. My own name felt foreign on my tongue. Jenkins, I stammered, my voice a pathetic whisper. "Sarah Jenkins." She gave a slow, deliberate nod, a gesture so full of cold fury it made my blood freeze. "Well," "Nurse Jenkins," she said, the emphasis on my title turning it from a sign of respect into an accusation. "I'm Dr. Alastair, the head of trauma surgery, the one Dr. Evans was screaming for." The world tilted on its axis. Dr. Alastair. The name was whispered in the halls with a mixture of reverence and terror. A surgical prodigy who had become head of the department before she was 40. I'd seen her name on memos and heard her voice on conference calls, but I'd never actually met her. She was a ghost, a legend who lived in the sterile confines of the operating room. And I had just told her to go sit in the waiting room and fill out paperwork. I had threatened to have her escorted out by security. The memory of my own words, my own smug, dismissive tone, crashed down on me like a physical blow. Bile rose in my throat. I felt the curious, shocked stares of my entire team, the nurses I managed, the techs I ordered around. They had all just witnessed my career swan dive into a concrete floor. Dr. Alastair didn't spare me another glance. She turned, her entire demeanor transforming from icy executioner to a laser-focused field marshal. "Everybody out who isn't essential," she barked, her voice filling the space, pushing the panic back. "Evans, what have you given him?" "2 rounds of epi, 1 of amio," Dr. Evans sputtered, looking like a medical student caught cheating on an exam. "Wrong," Alastair snapped, her eyes glued to the monitor displaying the jagged, chaotic rhythm of the patient's heart. "That's not VTAC, it's torsades de points. The amio is making it worse. You're killing him." She moved with an economy and grace that was breathtaking. "Nurse, get me 2 grams of magnesium sulfate, now." The nurse she pointed at fumbled for a second, starstruck. "Jenkins!" Alastair's voice cracked like a whip, and my name was a summons from the depths of my own personal hell. My training, 12 years of ingrained reflex, took over. My feet moved before my brain could process the shame. I spun around, ripped the vial from the crash cart, drew up the dose, and had the syringe in her hand in under 10 seconds. My hands were shaken, but my actions were precise. It was the only thing I had left. "Pushing mag," she announced calmly, injecting the medication into the IV port. She grabbed the paddles from Dr. Evans' nerveless hands. "Charge to 200. I need a thoracotomy tray on standby, and someone get me a real EKG, not this 3-lead garbage." Her hands were a blur of controlled energy. She was reading the monitors, giving orders, and physically managing the patient all at once. "He's got a tension pneumothorax left side. Look at the tracheal deviation. You missed it, Evans." She didn't wait for an answer. "Someone get me a 14-gauge needle and a chest tube kit." I was already there, holding the kit out for her. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. There was no acknowledgement, no flicker of anything. It was worse than anger. It was like I was a piece of equipment, a function, no longer a person. She took the needle, expertly inserted it into the patient's chest with a hiss of escaping air, and the numbers on the monitor instantly began to improve. The jagged rhythm on the screen began to organize itself, falteringly at first, then settling into a weak but steady sinus rhythm. A collective sigh of relief went through the room. We had a pulse.
Dr. Alastair didn't relax. "He's not out of the woods. He's still bleeding internally. I'm taking him to the OR myself, now." She started rattling off a list of orders to the stunned team. "Book OR 3. I want 2 units of FFP and 4 of packed red cells waiting. Page the on-call anesthesiologist. Tell them it's an emergency thoracotomy. Evans, you're with me. You're going to watch and you're going to learn what a trauma survey actually looks like." The burn of that last comment, directed at the attending physician, was so severe it practically singed my eyebrows. The team, jolted back into action by her authority, moved with a newfound purpose, a well-oiled machine under the command of its true leader. They were prepping the gurney, hanging blood, calling the OR. And I just stood there, on the periphery, the ghost at the feast. My role as conductor had been usurped. I was just a third-rate violinist with a broken string. As they began to wheel the gurney out of the trauma bay, the organized chaos moving like a current towards the elevators, Dr. Allister stopped. She methodically stripped off her bloody gloves, tossing them into the biohazard bin. She wiped her hands on a sanitary cloth, her movements slow and deliberate. Then she turned and walked directly towards me. The small crowd of nurses and techs parted for her like the Red Sea. She stopped less than a foot away from me at the nurses' station, my island, my fortress. It felt flimsy now, like it was made of cardboard. Her face was unreadable, a mask of cold professionalism, but her eyes held the full weight of the night's events. "Nurse Jenkins," she said, her voice dangerously quiet, forcing me and everyone else nearby to lean in. "For 12 minutes, from the moment I first attempted to speak with you until I intervened, you actively obstructed a physician from reaching a critical patient. You made a judgment call based on my appearance." I opened my mouth to say something, I don't know what, an apology, an excuse, but no words came out. My throat was a desert. "You didn't see a doctor," she continued, her voice slicing through the thick, tense air. "You saw a black woman in a hoodie, and you decided she was not a priority. Your prejudice nearly cost my patient his life, my hospital its reputation, and you your career." Each word was a perfectly placed stone, building a wall of shame around me. I could feel my face burning, my eyes stinging. I wanted the floor to swallow me whole. She looked past me, at the charge nurse keys hanging on a hook by the main computer. "You are relieved of your duties for the remainder of the shift. Give your keys to Nurse Davis." She paused, letting the public humiliation sink in. "Then I want you to go to that empty consultation room." She pointed a long, slender finger towards a small, glass-walled room down the hall. "And you are going to wait there. Don't speak to anyone, don't make any calls, just wait. When I am finished saving the man you almost let die, you and I are going to have a conversation about your future. Or rather," she said, her eyes narrowing into obsidian slits, "your lack thereof." She turned and walked away without another word, her worn-out sneakers making no sound on the polished linoleum floor. Her back was ramrod straight, a pillar of righteous fury disappearing down the hall toward the operating rooms. The silence she left in her wake was deafening. It was heavier and more suffocating than the chaos of the code had been just minutes before. Every eye in the ER was on me. I saw pity in some, shock in others, and in a few, I saw a flicker of something that looked disturbingly like satisfaction. I was Sarah Jenkins, the tough, no-nonsense charge nurse. I ran a tight ship, but I had just been publicly stripped of my command, my authority disintegrated in front of my entire crew. My hand trembled as I reached for the keys. They felt like they weighed 100 pounds. Brenda Davis, a kind, grandmotherly nurse who had been working here longer than I'd been alive, approached me cautiously, her face a mask of sympathy. "Sarah," she began, her voice soft. "Just take them, Brenda," I whispered, my voice cracking. I couldn't look her in the eye. I unhooked the keys and dropped them into her outstretched hand. The clinking sound they made as they hit her palm was like a death knell. I was no longer the conductor. I was nothing. I walked the green mile to the consultation room, each step an exercise in humiliation. The room was a sterile box designed for delivering bad news to families. A small round table, 3 uncomfortable chairs, a box of tissues. It was a place of grief and finality. How fitting. I sank into one of the chairs, the cheap plastic groaning under my weight. The glass walls offered no privacy. They turned the room into a fishbowl. I was on display, the ER's cautionary tale for the night. I could see the nurses at the station murmuring, occasionally glancing my way. I felt like an animal in a zoo. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Every beep of a monitor, every snippet of conversation I overheard from the hallway was a reminder of the world I was no longer a part of. The world I had ruled with an iron fist just an hour ago.
My mind replayed the scene with Dr. Allister over and over, each time with a fresh wave of mortifying clarity. Her calm request, my clipped, dismissive response, her insistence, my condescending lecture about the system, my threat to call security, the sheer unadulterated arrogance of it all. I buried my face in my hands. It wasn't just the arrogance, it was the why. Dr. Allister, it laid it bare. You made a judgment call based on my appearance. I wanted to deny it, to scream that it wasn't true, that I was just busy, stressed, overwhelmed. But I couldn't. The brutal honesty of her accusation pierced through all my self-serving justifications. Would I have treated a white man in a suit the same way? Would I have dismissed him so quickly if he'd been wearing a crisp button-down and carrying a briefcase instead of a cheap tote bag? The answer, a poisonous, shameful whisper in the back of my mind, was no. I probably would have at least given him the courtesy of my full attention. I saw the hoodie, the worn-out sneakers, the color of her skin, and my brain, running on its 12-year-old triage algorithm, had filed her under not important. It was an ugly, disgusting truth, a truth I had never wanted to confront about myself. I was a good nurse, a good person, wasn't I? An hour passed, then two. The ER's rhythm had returned to its normal state of controlled chaos under Brenda's experienced hand. The sun would be rising soon. I watched the flurry of activity outside my glass prison, feeling utterly detached from it all. I was a ghost haunting the scene of my own professional death. Finally, the door opened. It was Dr. Allister. She had changed out of her bloody scrubs into a fresh blue set. She looked exhausted, but the fire in her eyes was still there, banked but burning hot. She held 2 cups of what smelled like vending machine coffee. She pushed one across the table towards me without a word and sat down in the chair opposite. I didn't touch the coffee. I couldn't. My stomach was a knot of acid and dread.
She took a long sip from her cup, her gaze unwavering. "His name is Marcus Thorne," she said, her voice low and raspy with fatigue. "He's 34, a construction worker, has a wife and a 3-year-old daughter. He was on his way home from a double shift to get to her ballet recital. He's stable, for now. He'll live. He'll keep his leg. No thanks to the ER care he initially received." Every word was a twisting knife. She was making it personal. This wasn't just a chart, a set of symptoms. This was a man, a father, a husband, someone whose life had almost been extinguished by my bias. "Dr. Allister, I started, the words I'd been rehearsing for 2 hours turning to ash in my mouth. I am so sorry. There is no excuse for what I did, for how I treated you. It was unprofessional and wrong." She held up a hand, silencing me. "Save it," she said, her voice flat. "Your apology is irrelevant. Apologies don't fix perforated lungs or restart a heart that's been stopped by an overdose of the wrong medication." She took another sip of coffee. "I've already spoken to the hospital administrator and the head of nursing. I've given them my full report of the incident." This was it. The axe was falling. I braced myself. "Am I fired?" I asked, the words barely a whisper. She actually gave a short, bitter laugh. "Fired? Nurse Jenkins, that would be the easy way out, for you and for this hospital. No, firing you allows us to pretend the problem is solved. One bad apple removed from the barrel. It's neat, it's tidy, but it doesn't address the rot." I stared at her, completely bewildered. "I don't understand." "What you did tonight," she explained, leaning forward, her eyes locking onto mine, "was not a single, isolated mistake. It was a symptom of a systemic disease. A disease of assumptions, of prejudice, of seeing a hoodie and not a human being. A disease that kills people in hospitals every single day. People who look like me. People who don't have the luxury of being the head of surgery to save themselves." Her words hit me with the force of a physical blow. She was right. How many times had I done this before, on a smaller scale? How many patients had I dismissed or deprioritized based on some unconscious bias? How many people had received substandard care because I'd made a snap judgment based on their clothes, their accent, or the color of their skin? The thought was sickening. So, no, she continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You're not fired. It's not that simple. I've proposed something different to the board. A pilot program of sorts. And you, Nurse Jenkins, are going to be my first participant. A cold dread, far worse than the fear of being fired, began to creep up my spine. A pilot program? You said it yourself. You are good at your job. You know the systems, the procedures. You're efficient. She leaned back in her chair, a strange, calculating look on her face. Those are skills. But your judgment is compromised. Your perspective is fatally flawed. So, we're going to fix it. We are going to strip it all down and build it back up from scratch. She stood up, her presence filling the small room. The morning light was starting to stream through the windows, catching the exhaustion and the fierce determination etched on her face. Tomorrow morning at 7 a.m., you will not report to the ER, she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. You will report to the patient transport department in the hospital basement. Your new job title is patient transporter. You'll be taking patients to and from scans, moving them between wards, and bringing them down to the morgue. You'll be wearing their standard uniform. You will answer to their supervisor. You will do this for 1 month, for the exact same pay. And at the end of that month, you will report directly to me, and me alone. I was speechless. Patient transport? It was the lowest rung on the clinical ladder. It was a job for students and people with no medical training. It was a public, institutional shaming. And Nurse Jenkins, she said, pausing at the door, her hand on the handle. She turned to look at me one last time, and for the first time, I saw something other than anger in her eyes. It was something harder, something more profound. It looked like resolve. There's one more thing, she said, her voice barely audible. That man I saved tonight, Marcus Thorne, that wasn't just a random patient. That's my brother. The words hung in the air of that sterile little room, completely rearranging the molecular structure of my reality. That's my brother. It wasn't just a case of professional negligence anymore. It wasn't an abstract lesson in systemic bias. I had stood in the way, a smug, uniformed gatekeeper, while her family was bleeding out on a gurney 20 feet away. The sheer, gut-wrenching horror of that realization was a physical force, knocking the breath from my lungs. The room felt airless, my own heartbeat a frantic drum in my ears. I saw her not just as a surgeon now, but as a sister who had almost watched her brother die because of me. My month in the basement felt like a year. The patient transport uniform was a cheap, ill-fitting polyester thing, a constant, itchy reminder of my fall from grace. My first day, pushing an elderly woman to her MRI, I passed the ER. My former colleagues averted their eyes. Brenda gave me a small, sad wave, but most of them just pretended not to see me. I was a pariah, the charge nurse who flew too close to the sun and had her wings of authority melted away. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on my shoulders with every patient I pushed, every gurney I guided through the labyrinthine hospital corridors.
But something else began to happen in that basement, away from the adrenaline and the God complex of the ER. My job was no longer about charts and stats. It was about people. I wasn't triaging them. I was talking to them. I learned that Mrs. Gable in 304 was terrified of tight spaces, so I held her hand and told her stupid jokes all the way to her scan. I learned that Mr. Henderson, on his way to dialysis, had a grandson who played baseball on the same Little League team my nephew did. I learned that the stoic man being wheeled down for his final chemo treatment was a retired history professor who could talk for hours about the Roman Empire. And then there were the journeys to the morgue. They were silent, solemn trips, the only sound the squeak of the gurney wheels on the linoleum. In those moments, Pushing a body shrouded in a white sheet, the finality of it all was overwhelming. This wasn't a flat line on a monitor. It was the end of a story that had belonged to a person with a name, a family, a life. These were the people I had been reducing to numbers and symptoms for 12 years. For the first time, I wasn't seeing patterns. I was seeing people. Dr. Alastair's punishment, which I had initially seen as a cruel and unusual shaming, was starting to feel different. It wasn't just a punishment. It was a re-education. She hadn't just demoted me. She had forced me into a position where empathy was the primary job requirement. She had stripped away my power so I could finally see what was truly important. The end of the month came. I reported to her office, a place I had never imagined I'd see. It was neat, organized, with medical textbooks lining the walls and a single framed photo on her desk. I could see it was her and a smiling man, her brother, Marcus, standing with a little girl on his shoulders. She gestured for me to sit, her expression as unreadable as ever. "Report," she said, her tone all business. I took a deep breath. I didn't make excuses, I didn't grovel. I just told her the truth. I told her about Mrs. Gable's claustrophobia and Mr. Henderson's grandson. I told her about the silence on the way to the morgue. I told her how, for the first time in a long time, I had remembered why I became a nurse in the first place. Not for the power, not for the adrenaline, but to help people. "I see them now, doctor," I finished, my voice thick with an emotion I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. "I really see them, and I see what I became. What I allowed myself to become. You were right. It wasn't just a mistake. It was rot. And I was rotten." She listened, her steepled fingers pressed to her lips, her dark eyes searching mine. The silence stretched, and I prepared myself for the final verdict, for the termination I knew I still deserved. "Marcus is home now," she said softly, breaking the silence. "He's starting physical therapy next week. He asked about you." I flinched. "He did?" "Yes," she said. "I told him what happened, all of it." She paused. "He said to tell you he forgives you. He said people make mistakes when they're scared and overworked, and he hopes you can find a way to forgive yourself." Tears I didn't know I was holding back began to stream down my face. Forgiveness was something I hadn't even dared to hope for. It was a grace I was sure I hadn't earned. "Your time in transport is over," Dr. Alastair said, her voice firm again. "But you're not going back to being charge nurse." My heart sank. Of course not. It was too much to expect. "The position is still open," she continued, "and Brenda is happy to go back to her regular duties. But if you take it, it will be under a new set of conditions." She slid a folder across the desk. It was a proposal. "The Sarah Jenkins Protocol," it was titled. My name. I opened it. It was a plan for a complete overhaul of the ER's triage and intake system. It included mandatory, ongoing bias training, a new patient advocate position to handle communication, and a mentorship program where senior nurses would be paired with transporters for 1 shift a month to stay grounded. It was revolutionary, it was brilliant, and it was based entirely on the disease she had identified in me. I was speechless. "You want me to run this?" "I don't want you to run it," she said, standing up and walking to the window that overlooked the hospital courtyard. "I want you to lead it. I don't need a conductor who just keeps the tempo. I need a leader who listens to every instrument in the orchestra, especially the quiet ones." She turned back to face me. That night, I came to the ER in a hoodie and jeans because I'd just gotten off a plane from a conference. My car had a flat, so I took a ride share to the hospital when I got the call about Marcus. I didn't have time to change. I didn't think I'd need to. I thought being a doctor would be enough. She looked me dead in the eye. "It should have been enough. Your protocol is designed to make sure that next time, for the next person, it is." I left her office that day a different person than the one who had entered. The keys to the ER felt different to me this time. They weren't a symbol of power. They were a symbol of responsibility. When I walked back into the ER, wearing my own scrubs, my own name badge, the murmuring stopped.
The stares weren't of pity or scorn, but of curiosity, of a cautious, uncertain respect. My first act was to walk over to the waiting room. I looked at every single person sitting there. The man in the expensive suit with a cut on his head, the young mother trying to soothe a crying baby, the homeless man coughing in the corner. I looked each of them in the eye. I saw them, not as charts, not as wait times, not as insurance problems, but as people. Scared, hurting people, who all deserved to be seen. My gaze finally landed on a terrified-looking teenager clutching her arm, trying to be invisible. She looked a lot like I felt a month ago. I walked over, knelt down beside her chair, and gave her a small, genuine smile. "Hi," I said, my voice softer than it had been in years. "I'm Sarah. I'm the nurse in charge. Can you tell me what's going on? I have time."